to the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show with Corey and Justin. Here they are, the Fourth and Long Fantasy Brothers.
Welcome to episode 25. We are a quarter of the way to 100 of the Fourth and Long Fantasy Football Show. My name is Corey, and I am here with my actual brother, Justin.
Hello, this is Justin.
All right, Justin, here we go. Episode 25 is coming at us fast, and just like every other week in the NFL, we've got some injury news. Let's get started, Justin, talking about a guy who came back this week, his much-anticipated return, and got injured again.
Yeah, Christian McCaffrey came back after being out majority of the season here. Really looked great. 2 touchdowns, was that dominant RB1 that you drafted him number 1 overall to be. Had a shoulder injury towards the end of the game. Initial reports were that his Week 10 status was in doubt, but Matt Rule came out this week and claimed he was day-to-day. Going to have to monitor reports. Wednesday, Thursday, Friday participation will be key in telling if McCaffrey will be back out there for Week 10. If he does miss, Mike Davis becomes a plug-and-play RB1 once again.
Justin, what about a couple of RB2s who are unfortunately dealing with some concussions after getting hit pretty hard in last week's games?
Yeah, David Montgomery and David Johnson both left their games with concussions. I'll start with David Johnson. He looked good beginning of the game, right? He ripped off a big chunk run, one of the first plays of the game, but then was quickly ruled out with a concussion. Duke Johnson came in and kind of carried the load from there on out. If David Johnson cannot get healthy, Duke should be the guy to own. He's a great waiver wire pickup this week if he's out there. Monitor reports again. And then for David Montgomery, concussion late in the game in the fourth quarter. Montgomery was having a rough game. We'll talk about him in a little bit. If he can get out there and do a limited practice at some point, he should be good to go Week 10. Keep an eye on those practice reports for both of those guys.
All right, Justin. And now that we have some guys who are in question or may not be suiting up in Week 10, there are a couple guys who we're expecting to return, and that's Joe Mixon, Nick Chubb, and Miles Sanders.
Yeah, a trifecta of RB1s, all expected to come back this week after sitting through their team's Week 9 buys. Joe Mixon, fully expect him to be back healthy. They gave him an extra week or two to get healthy and get out there. I think Gio Bernard should fade back into being more of a handcuff here. Same thing with Nick Chubb coming back. Kareem Hunt should still have value, but Nick Chubb should still get his 20 or so weekly touches, go back to being that low-end RB1 we know him to be. And then Miles Sanders back in the fold here for Week 10, all expected to come back. I think Sanders is high-end RB2, low-end RB1 this week. Good news for all three of those young backs.
All right, Justin, we wanted to talk about a couple of things that we touched on last week in our Future Edition, and we touched on 2 big-time running backs. One came back and lit it up, and we've already sort of talked about. The other, oh boy, we got to talk about this. Why don't you get us started with CMC, Christian McCaffrey?
Yeah, we already talked about his injury. Got to monitor that as the week unfolds here day to day at this point. Hope that he does suit up Week 10. You've been waiting out for him all year. Would really stink to have him come back and then immediately get hurt again. But he did kind of reclaim that bell cow role. Mike Davis did rotate in early in the game. McCaffrey seemed to take the helm and run with it the latter part of the game. He looks great. Just hope he's healthy and that he plays Week 10.
Yeah, Justin, he did look good, but I got to say, someone who maybe didn't really look all that good, although it's tough to say this about the Cowboys offense right now because none of it's really looking good. But I said Ezekiel Elliott's more of an RB2 at this point and kind of a low-end one at that. So was I right, Justin? I mean, another disappointing week for Ezekiel Elliott.
Yeah, he didn't look great. I mean, he had a good drive late in the fourth quarter. He had an out route that he dropped. It didn't look great, but he's not really known for being a route running specialist out of the running back position. He's more of a dump off guy. It's difficult to tell, right? I mean, are we seeing the kind of the fall of Elliott here, or is he just is it kind of just a result of the offense around him? I'd probably lean on the side of the offense around him playing into his last lack of success. I wouldn't panic if I had Elliott. He's more of an RB2 for the rest of the season here.
Yeah, I don't know, Justin. I mean, it's definitely a good question that you're posing. Is this a downfall or is this just sort of a messy situation? The one thing that makes me, gives me pause is the fact that Tony Pollard comes in and just looks a little better. I mean, it's strange. It really is strange to say that, but it's just the way it's looked right now. Yeah. But it's tough to make assumptions on what this offense is. So Justin, with that said, let's get to it.
On today's show.
All right, we continue our weekly format for you this week. As always, today, Justin and I will discuss a past, a present, and a future topic as we reflect on Week 9 and get you prepared for your Week 10 matchups. Justin, we've already touched on this guy a little bit, but why don't you get us started talking about how things are going for the Chicago running back, David Montgomery?
Yeah, David Montgomery, I was high on the second year back coming into the season here, high character kid. Cohen went down early and it resulted in some serious usage for Montgomery. It really has over the last number of weeks here. He's currently 7th in the NFL in carries, and he's 6th in running back targets out of the backfield, which is really encouraging. So the opportunities are there, but he has 8 games with under 12 fantasy points in the 9 weeks so far. Not great. And the issue is not really with Monty, though. It's not with Montgomery. He's got an inept offensive line. They've got stagnant play calling, right? Matt Nagy can't call a game script for his life. And you watch the Bears play, and every time Montgomery touches the ball, it seems like he's hit behind the line every single time. That Swiss cheese offensive line is doing him no favors at all. Now, the question is, right, is Montgomery good, right? And it's hard to say. I don't think Montgomery is a generational talent, right? He's not a Saquon Barkley. He's not a Nick Chubb. He's not of that caliber. But it's incredibly nearsighted for people to say that he's just not good when the cards have been stacked against him really since his rookie season. I'm not going to give up on this young back quite yet. I'm not selling, and I'm actually going to buy if I can right now for David Montgomery. I think he's a great buy low right now. His rest of season schedule looks really promising, especially for running backs. It's one of the most favorable in the NFL right now at this point. He's going to continue to get those 15 to 20 touches a game. And if he can start scoring, he'll be a rock-solid contributor for your team. Now, monitor the injury reports, right? He did have a concussion week 9. If he can suit up week 10 and he's healthy, he's going to continue to get those touches. I think he's an RB2 from here on out.
Justin, do you think if you were to swap James Robinson and David Montgomery, is that like a good comparison of like same guys with the same skill set, but really in drastically different situations?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult, right? I don't know that any running back can really be successful in that Bears offense right now. They've got like a high school offensive line playing for them. Majority of their offensive linemen this past week were on the COVID list. It's really not a great situation. I don't know necessarily that anyone would be successful. The one promising thing is that Montgomery is breaking tackles at a high rate. He's, top 3 or 4 in the NFL in broken tackle rate right now, which is a testament to how well he does just being able to jiggle around that backfield and kind of make yards for himself. I mean, his line's not giving him any help. He's got to do it all on himself. It's funny watching the Bears games. The commentators make comments throughout the game where it's like, man, David Montgomery just has no room at all to run. And it's just so true watching the Bears week in and week out.
So, Justin, when do you lose faith, if ever? Are you willing to give him a mulligan for the year and sort of look at this again next year? Or is there a certain point at this season where you're just going to sort of throw your hands up in the air and throw the towel in?
Yeah, like I said, with the rest of the season schedule looking the way it is, he's got really favorable matchups running-wise for the rest of the season here. If he can't start putting it together over the next couple of weeks, man, I'm going to be not quite as bullish on him going into the 2021 season.
Sounds good, Justin. And speaking of being bullish, let's talk about a position in fantasy football that certainly you've had to be bullish to get any sort of production, because I want to talk about the position of tight end and the idea of a reliable tight end and how, honestly, Justin, it feels like there's no such thing as that anymore. So this may actually be a conversation about fantasy as a whole, but tight end may just be more of a mess than ever before, which I didn't think was possible. The prototypical tight end scenario year in and year out has been 1 to 3 elite options, another 2 or 5 guys who are solid starters, a series of boomer bust guys, and then all the Hail Mary streamers. This year, here's the list, Justin. Travis Kelce up top, 1 major drop-off, Darren Waller, and then literally any tight end in the league after another significant drop-off. That's it. The Evan Engrams, the Mark Andrews, the Hunter Henrys, or the Gronks of the world have fallen a whole tier below their expected location, maybe even 2. And instead, you cannot look at them as anything more than just reliable as like the 15th best option at the tight end position. It is ugly, Justin. And this might bring apart a larger conversation into the fantasy realm. And it's a conversation I want to have with you very quickly here. Should tight end not be a thing anymore in fantasy? Should we instead just have a wide receiver tight end combo position? Because if there's a position where you can really only confidently start 2 guys in the whole league, we may need to adjust to a new normal in the NFL. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's a bold call, Corey, right? I mean, there's kind of that natural ebb and flow to fantasy football, right? You're going to have years where the running back position's down, the wide receiver position's down. Maybe 2020 is the year of the down tight end. I think the strategy, though, if you look at it, right, and you're looking at future years, especially next year, right? I mean, could Travis Kelce be a first-round pick next year?
Yeah, Justin. I mean, when you're talking about a situation when there is a low supply, the demand on what the premium is going to be is it's going to be so high. It's going to be like that situation where Gronk was lighting the world on fire. But even when Gronk was in his elite stages, there were still guys you could rely on, right? I mean, there were Jimmy Grahams and there were Kyle Rudolphs and there were guys that were a part of their team's game plans. Tight ends now, if your name's not Travis Kelce or Darren Waller, you're not in the game plan. You're a backup option in the offense. So that's why I'm starting to think, like, I don't know. I feel like we're going in a direction where tight ends aren't used as tight ends anymore. Very rarely are they, the tight ends that are receiving options aren't even lining up on the line. Like Travis Kelce does, but then he's split out in the slot or split out wide. Same thing with Darren Waller. So I guess my question is, should we catch up with the NFL, or should we go with what you're saying, which is maybe hold on a little bit because we might end up going back to normal? Is that sort of your point here?
Yeah, it may not be a bad idea to experiment, in 2021 with a league where you don't have the tight end position. It's tough to say, but at the same time, it provides a different perspective as it relates to how you're going to draft your team and how you prioritize the tight end position. I mean, you look at the position this year and you're completely right, Corey. I mean, it is a complete dart throw, right? You've got guys that you thought were going to emerge off the waiver wire like Jonnu Smith and Harrison Bryant, and they've been completely unreliable and inconsistent every single week. It's so tough. You look at a guy like Hunter Henry. You and I both love the guy. He's very talented, one of the better talent-wise tight ends in the league, and he just hasn't put it together this season. It's been a real disappointment across the entire position in 2020 for the tight ends.
Yeah, Justin, I got to agree. And let's move past the past and let's start to focus in on the future and the present. And Justin, is there a certain wide receiver that you might be looking to in the event that you're a wide receiver needy person right now who's making his comeback?
Yeah, one of my favorite pickups this week for week 10 is going to be Allen Lazard. And I actually jumped on Lazard last week. I thought he was going to be able to make it back in week 9, but the short week held him for making his return. They played on Thursday Night Football, but all indications point to him returning in week 10. And Lazard established himself in the first 3 weeks of the season as the clear number 2 option for the Packers. And I think he picks right back up where he left off. Now, did you know, Corey, that Lazard averaged 17 PPR points per game the first 3 weeks of the season? That's a rock-solid wide receiver 2 with wide receiver 1 week upside. Now, Aaron Rodgers is playing the best football he's played in years, and I want a piece of that pie, man. If Devontae Adams is Batman, I think Lazard is Robin. And if someone dropped Lazard when he got injured back in week 3, go scoop him up, man. Don't walk, but run to the waiver wire and grab Lazard for week 10.
Yeah, and when you have a guy like Valdez-Scantling who just loves dropping balls every time he gets one thrown to him, I mean, I know he has moments where he looks really, really good. I just think Lazard's the more reliable option, and I think every time he's gotten a chance in this Green Bay offense, he's been the number 2 guy, right? I mean, we saw this last year, and then we saw it this year. So I'm with you, Justin. He would be a guy that I definitely would be targeting if he's out there for you.
Yeah. And it's the Packers' number 2 option seems to rotate on a weekly basis, right? One week it's Robert Tonyan. The next week it's Marquez Valdez-Scantling. Next week it's Equanimeous St. Brown. I think Lazard will provide some stability to that number 2 receiving position for the Packers. I'd prioritize him as my number 1 pickup this week.
Justin, I would actually have one guy above him, and it's a guy who's come on of late, and this is going to be sort of the hot ticket item that a lot of people will be getting excited about simply because of, we just saw him a few days ago on Monday Night Football. But Jacoby Myers, I'm not sure, Justin, is this a real thing or is this just a mirage? Now, here's another I don't know situation, and I've had a few of these on the show in the past week of the I just don't know situations, and I have confidently placed my flags on some guys with varying success, right? I said, Herbert, go get him. And so far, that seems like it's been a grand slam. I said the same thing about Corey Davis, and that's probably not as much a grand slam, although he still seems to have some fantasy relevance if you don't look at this past week. But here's another I don't know, Justin. It's Jacoby Myers, the man who has seemingly replaced Julian Edelman since his injury, is quickly becoming Cam Newton's favorite target whenever the Pats decide to throw, which, isn't all that often. But here's why I'm confused, right? I mean, that sounds good, right? The Julian Edelman replacement, if you can get what Julian Edelman was a couple years ago in the Pats offense, Cool. That's a guy you want to have on your roster. But here is where my confusion comes from. Number one, the man couldn't vault over Damiere Byrd or N'Keal Harry prior to Edelman's injury, right? And number two, we see this every year. Every year, we see guys jump into the limelight of fantasy production only to fade once defenses key in a little bit. But also, we see Travis Fulgham and we see Tyler Boyd from a few years ago. And we see Stephon Diggs before that. Guys who eventually emerge in offenses and find a pretty permanent role, even if it's not as prominent as it was in the past. But I'm adding Jakobi Meyers to this list of just situations I don't know. But I'm adding him, and in some situations, Justin, I'm even considering starting him. But I'm not sold that this is a forever thing. This very well could be a mirage waiting to disappear on us. What are your thoughts on Meyers?
Jakobi looked great Monday Night Football against the Jets. He really helped bring them back and allow the Patriots to kick that game-winning field goal as time expired. He flashed a lot even last year, Corey, with Tom Brady. You and I both, as Patriot fans, said, wow, man, that Jakobi Meyers guy is really looking solid. And he's been a solid contributor for the Patriots week in and week out. He's especially, he's really emerged over the last couple of weeks, getting targets now, over 100 yards in Monday night's game. I think it's a good pickup. The only thing I'm concerned about is just the offense around him. That's why I'm prioritizing Lazard over a guy like Meyers, just because of the quarterback play. And we know what we're going to get out of Rodgers versus the potential inconsistency of Cam Newton and his inability to throw the ball downfield. But I like the call, man. Take the dart throw on Meyers, and you might have a wide receiver too in the making here.
Well, Justin, I mean, if we look back on this and we realize, oh, it was a mirage, we'll know why, right? I mean, he had one great game, and that was against the Jets, which was, sort of a porous defense. And, other than that, he had a high target game the game before, but didn't produce a ton. And if he does fade away, we're all going to be like, yeah, we should have seen that coming. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, every passing offense, even the ones that seem inept, are going to have a guy who's going to sustain some fantasy value. And that might be Jakobi Meyers here. And he might be, a wide receiver 3, maybe even on some very thin weeks, he might be a wide receiver 2. Speaking of situations, Justin, that we're just not sure about, and this one specifically, not really playing out the way that we expected. What's going on with Kansas City's backfield?
Yeah, let me set the stage here, man, for the Kansas City Chiefs backfields, right? So you had Clyde Edwards-Helaire come in, the first rounder. He was a consensus first, second round pick before the season. And he showed pretty well the first few weeks, right? He wasn't spectacular, but he was solid. Then you got Le'Veon Bell entering the fold here, right? And this has become a true split backfield. Now in week 9, CEH played 43% of the snaps. Lev Bell played 31% of the snaps. But it's not really the snap share that's concerning me. It's really the usage for this Kansas City Chiefs backfield. The Chiefs seem to be completely content with throwing the ball on almost every single down for the entire game, while leaving their backs with only maybe a dozen or so touches a game. You look at Clyde Edwards-Helaire the last 3 games. He's had 9, 9, and 8 touches the last 3 weeks, right? Less than 10 touches is not great for a running back. I don't care what offense they're in. And I don't blame them, right? The Chiefs have the best quarterback in football. But when you split only a dozen or so touches per week between 2 backs, it completely suffocates whatever value the Chiefs' backfield typically offered in years past. Lev Bell looks droppable at this point, to be honest with you, and Clyde looks like an RB3 with his current usage.
Yeah, Justin, especially in a shallow league, like you can't waste time, especially now, on guys that are going to only get 10 touches a game at most, right? I mean, you really have to reserve those positions for guys who are going to get sort of a nice workload. And obviously talent matters. And I think Lev Bell and CEH both have a tremendous amount of talent in their bodies, but right now they're just not getting the looks. They're not getting the usage. CEH was obviously a great option when that backfield was all his, but now it's split, and that's probably good for the Kansas City Chiefs, but it's not good for the Kansas City Chiefs backfield fantasy situation at all, right?
Yeah, no. Is it time to buy low on Clyde? I mean, this might be the opportunity to buy low in Dynasty.
Yeah, if you can convince the CEH owner that they need to get rid of him now while he's coming off of a great early start, definitely do it. I think probably most owners are holding, but definitely worth a shot, especially if you want someone who has a tremendous amount of upside for the rest of his career. Well, Justin, as one area of the Kansas City offense sinks, boy, another one seems to just be rising and rising. And I have a feeling that we are on the verge of Tyreek Hill getting set to absolutely explode. Now, Tyreek Hill has made a name on collecting chunk yardage through big plays and some explosive game-breaking skills. And yet, that's not the Tyreek Hill we've been seeing so far this year. Yeah, some big plays have been there. And yes, as always, he does gain yardage through intermediate and short routes. But Tyreek has seen most of his weekly success come from some favorable red zone work, getting touchdowns when they're within 15, 10, and even 5 yards of the end zone. So what does this mean? Well, I think it's all good for Tyreek. I think this means that Tyreek may be primed for a huge second half of this season, more accustomed to what we saw this past weekend where he put up over 20 fantasy standard points. Will there be down weeks? Of course, every wide receiver does, but his ceiling has only been scratched right now at this point in the season, and I see big things to come for the Cheetah, Justin. How about you?
Yeah, the fastest man in the NFL, right? I mean, you pair that with Mahomes' arm, and it's a recipe for fantasy success. I mean, honestly, I think Tyreek Hill is got to be, without a doubt, top 5 dynasty wide receiver. The dude's just so electric, and when you're playing with the best quarterback in the NFL, it's great news for a wide receiver like Tyreek Hill. The guy killed me this week. Corey, you and I played each other, and he really hurt me, man, with those 2 touchdowns, 100 yards. It was rough, but, man, he's just so talented. I love the talent.
Yeah, I am so glad that I have Tyreek Hill. And there we go, Justin. I know you're not so happy, but our Week 10 show for the 2020 season is now in the books. Next week, we continue our weekly seasonal episodes. We're going to recap Week 10 and get you ready for, I can't believe it, Week 11. Remember to subscribe and hit the bell, download, follow, like, comment, whatever else you have to do to show some support. I'm Corey.
And I'm Justin.
And this has been the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. We'll see you next week.
Royalty-free music courtesy of Ben Sound. The views and opinions expressed on today's episode are that of the 4th and Long Fantasy Football Show. Remember to like and subscribe.